Our next speaker is Grover Furr, and Grover is the author of many works, very controversial and very seriously researched works, including Khrushchev Live, critique of the Khrushchev in the Soviet history, Trotsky's Amalgams, and my favorite one happens to be Blood Lies, which is a critique of Timothy Snyder's attack on the Soviet Union and being no different than Hitler, called Blood Lands. His most recent book is Yeltsin versus Stalin, and as I said, he's presently a professor at Montclair State University.
Just quickly before Grover begins, we're going to pass around sign-in sheets. We ask that everybody sign up. Appreciate it.
Jackie, could you give me a 2-minute warning and a 1-minute warning?
Yes, he's doing that.
Yeah. All right, well,
And put a little check next to your name if you're interested in attending a follow-up discussion with Avi. Okay. No, Doug's going to do it.
Yeah, would you?
He'll do it.
Okay.
1 and 2.
All right, good morning.
Okay, Grover, go.
Good morning. I mistakenly thought I had 20 minutes, and now I find I have 12. So I've got to abbreviate this talk a little bit. I think I can do it without missing too much. I have 2 handouts. I hope that you all get them. If you don't see me afterwards, I'll give them to you. Okay, my title is Reclaiming the History of the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution and the other communist-led revolutions and the revolts against colonialism that it spurred and supported were the greatest movement for human liberation in history. The period of Joseph Stalin's leadership of the Bolshevik Party and the Soviet state is the heroic period of the Soviet history. The greatest achievements of the Soviet Union and many of the greatest victories of the communist movement internationally took place during this period. Some of these triumphs are the collectivization of agriculture in the Soviet Union that ended the 1,000-year cycle of murderous famines in Russia and the Ukraine. The industrialization of this backward country, the fight against racism and the spread of ideology and practice of combating racism throughout the world, the fight against sexism, the conquest of illiteracy, the Communist International, or Comintern, which spread the communist movement into virtually every country on earth. Communist Comintern helped to organize the independent struggles of many colonial peoples from the murderous domination of the so-called Western democracies. We in the United States owe the few social welfare benefits we have to the fear that American capitalists had for communist revolution because of the example of the Stalin-led Soviet Union. So it is no exaggeration to call the communist movement of the 20th century during the Stalin period the greatest movement for human liberation ever. These great actions and achievements are the reason why so many lies about Stalin and Soviet history of that period are propagated. These lies serve to obscure and deny the triumphs of the communist movement of the 20th century. At the same time, they prevent us from understanding what really happened in the Soviet Union during that time. This means they prevent us from learning the lessons, positive and negative, that we must learn from this history. I have to abbreviate my discussion of some of these lies. But let me start by talking about Khrushchev's lies. In terms of its practical impact on world history, Khrushchev's secret speech is the most influential speech of all time. In it, Khrushchev painted Stalin as a bloodthirsty tyrant guilty of a reign of terror lasting more than 2 decades. Soviet historians elaborated Khrushchev's lies. These falsehoods were repeated by Cold War anti-communists like Robert Conquest. They entered left discourse through the works of Trotskyists, anarchists, and pro-Moscow communists. Mikhail Gorbachev continued this avalanche of anti-communist lies that provided the ideological smokescreen for the return to exploitative practices within the Soviet Union and ultimately for the abandonment of socialist reforms and a return to predatory capitalism. In my book, Khrushchev Lied, I identify 61 accusations that Khrushchev made against either Stalin or Lavrentiy Beria in that secret speech. I study each one of them in the light of evidence available from former Soviet archives. I found that 60 of the 61 accusations are provably demonstrably false. This fact suggests that we should look carefully at other supposed crimes of Stalin and the Soviet Union during his time. So I will not discuss my research on the assassination of Sergei Kirov in 1934, or my book on Timothy Snyder's completely false work, Bloodlands. But let me say a little bit about the lies of Leon Trotsky. Shortly after the Leon Trotsky archive at Harvard's Houghton library was opened in January 1980, Trotskyist historian Pierre Brouet discovered evidence proving that a secret bloc of Trotskyists and other opposition groups within the Soviet Union, as charged by the Moscow trials, had indeed existed. Meanwhile, American historian Art Getty discovered that Trotsky had secretly sent letters to at least Karl Radek, Grigory Sokolnikov, and Evgeny Preobrazhensky, who had publicly recanted Trotskyism. Getty did not find the letters, only the certified mail receipts for them. Getty realized this meant the Trotsky archive had been purged. The letters that we know were removed prove at the very least that Trotsky lied during the 1930s by claiming that he never maintained contact with oppositionists inside the Soviet Union when in reality was doing so, and that claiming he had never agreed to a secret bloc between his supporters and other opposition groups when in fact he had done precisely that. In my book, Trotsky's Amalgams, 2015, I also devote 2 chapters to the Dewey Commission. This was a group set up supposedly to study the charges against Trotsky that had been made during the first and second Moscow trials. Eventually, the Dewey Commission published 2 fat volumes. If the Dewey Commission members had known that Trotsky was lying to them, they could never have concluded as they did that Trotsky was not guilty. This proves the Dewey Commission was and remains a world-class swindle. A decade ago, I began to collect primary source evidence on the question of whether Leon Trotsky did indeed conspire with the German and Japanese military, as alleged in the second and third Moscow trials. There are only 2 hypotheses that can account for all of this evidence. 1, Trotsky did conspire with the Germans and Japanese. Or 2, all of this evidence was fabricated, faked by Stalin or by the NKVD. I examine all of this in my second book on Trotsky in the 1930s, to be called Trotsky's Conspiracies. It will be published this fall. The Moscow trials. All Trotskyist and anti-communist scholars assume the defendant's testimony at the Moscow trials was falsified in some way. There has never been any evidence to support this assumption, but there is a lot of evidence to the contrary, that the testimony was genuine. I devote the first 12 chapters of my book, Trotsky's Amalgams, to carefully checking and verifying this testimony. The Great Terror. Nikolai Yezhov, head of the NKVD, had his own conspiracy against the Soviet government and party leadership, and had also been recruited by German intelligence. Like the Reits and Trotskyites, Yezhov and his NKVD men were counting on an invasion by Germany, Japan, or other major capitalist countries. They tortured a great many innocent people into confessing to capital crimes so that they could be shot. They executed a great many more on falsified grounds or on no grounds at all. From the evidence we have now available, it appears there were 2 kinds of conspiracies against Stalin and the Soviet leadership. The first were oppositionists. The second was comprised of party officials who bitterly opposed the Stalin Constitution of 1936. They were especially hostile to 2-point Senate, contested elections for the Soviets, the legislative branch of government, and putting political power into the hands of the Soviets rather than into the hands of party officials. Stalin was trying to carry out one of the basic demands of the Revolution of 1917, all power to the Soviets. This threatened the domination of party leaders over all areas of economic and political life. Under Beria, the number of executions in 1939 to 1940 dropped to less than 1% of the number under Yezhov in 1937 and 1938. And many of those executed were NKVD men, including Yezhov himself, who were found guilty of massive unjustified repression and executions of innocent people. I present the evidence in my latest book, Yezhov versus Stalin, The Truth About Mass Repressions of the So-Called Great Terror in the Soviet Union. The Katyn Massacre. In April 1943, Nazi German authorities claimed that they had discovered thousands of bodies of Polish officers shot by Soviet officials in 1940 near the Katyn Forest near Smolensk in western Russia. I have recently completed a book-length study of the Katyn issue. It will be published in March or April of next year. In this book, I study all the primary source evidence and all of the important secondary sources. Katyn has been the best documented so-called crime of Stalinism, and it is a lie. To conclude, why would all these people, and others that I haven't had time to mention, lie about Stalin and the Stalin-era Soviet Union if they knew of any real, demonstrable, provable crimes of what they call Stalinism? The only possible conclusion is they cannot find a single real provable crime that Stalin and the Soviets committed. This is the best evidence we will probably ever have that there were no such crimes. In conclusion, I would like to say something about objectivity and attempt to discover the truth. Almost all books and articles published today about Soviet history of the Stalin period are controlled by what I call the anti-Stalin paradigm. In Western academic discussion, it is obligatory that a researcher come to conclusions that confirm the Trotskyist and anti-communist portrayal of Stalin as a vicious, evil killer and dictator, and the Soviet Union as a site of mass murder and cruelty. If you are unwilling to cut your research to fit this biased framework, you simply cannot have an academic career in the West at all. Trotskyists and anti-communists do not want the truth about the history of the communist movement in the Soviet Union during the Stalin years to come to light. They want to continue to demonize it, to compare it to Hitler and fascism, and to lie about it. And that's what they do. Marx and Engels wrote that the proletariat has nothing to lose but its chains. By that I assume they mean that we have no sacred cows, nothing we refuse to subject to critical scrutiny. We want to cast aside all illusions and falsehoods. Only the truth shall make us free if we are against all exploitation of man by man, if we are the international working class. Marx's favorite slogan was De omnibus disputandum. Question everything. And question your preconceived ideas and biases above all others. If you want to learn the truth, that's what you must do. That's what I try hard to do. None of the demonizers of Stalin and the Soviet Union, the Trotskyist and anti-communist experts, make any attempt to be objective. They do not discover the truth because they don't want to do so. They want to write propaganda with footnotes, and that's what their works are. In my view, the importance of all this new evidence and research lies mainly in proving the utter dishonesty of the mainstream accounts of Soviet history. Accounts that pass for the truth not only among Cold War anti-communists, not only among Trotskyists, but also are the mainstream view of most of the left. We Marxists ought to be relieved. All around the world, the horror stories about Stalin and the Stalin period are employed to discredit Marxism, socialism, and communism. Now we can see these horror stories are lies. The communist movement in the Soviet Union did not lead to communism. Instead, it led back to capitalism. Obviously, then, the Bolsheviks made serious errors. But these are the errors not of criminals and murderers, but of pioneers. The Bolsheviks were blazing an unmarked trail. In this sense, then, they were not even errors, but part of the process of learning how to build communism. But we who come after them must carefully study what they did. We will never discover what those errors were, or what the Bolsheviks did that was right, correct, admirable, worthy of imitation, unless we know what really happened. A new and better communist movement can only be rebuilt upon a sound foundation of historical truth, not upon the sand of Trotskyist and anti-communist lies. I am glad to be playing a small part in the effort to discover this true history. Thank you.
The honor of having a guest coming from Russia, Alexander Buzgalin from Moscow State University. He is on the Faculty of Economics there, and he is the editor of Alternatives. He was a member of the organizing committee of the Russian Social Forum and an author of numerous books and articles, including Global Equity, Limits to Capital, and Socialism in the 21st Century. To have a Russian socialist is a unique experience these days.
So, colleagues, dear comrades, I'm very, very glad to be here. It's a big honor for me to be again in the West Forum in New York. I didn't come here for 5 years, and now we are here again. Because we have dialogue, we had dialogue, and I hope we will have dialogue. I have a few remarks before I make my presentation. I prepared PowerPoint, and if you want, I will write my email. I can send it to you. Here there are some technical obstacles. First remark, we have a very contradictory situation for Marxist and left studies in Russia. From one hand, we have semi-authoritarian regime. I was asked one time, can you say openly in radio that Putin is not a good person? I will use very polite form. I said, no, we cannot criticize Putin in radio. But then I asked, and can you on the first channel of US TV say that Putin is a good guy? So that's why we have some contradictions. Both in US and in Russia. Honestly speaking, because we have a rebirth of so-called patriotism in our country, with positive and negative aspects of this trend. We have also some forms of rebirth of Soviet culture and nostalgia about Soviet Union, again with positive and negative features. But as strange result of this, we have little bit more opportunities for left and Marxist academic studies. Only a few examples. We have access to mainstream journals, and we are publishing our texts in the questions of philosophy. This is the main philosophical journal for academic people. We are publishing articles in questions of economy. Their main journal for economic theory, in political studies, sociological studies, and so on. So this is not very typical for the West. And one more interesting example, just 1 month ago in philosophical department of philosophy of Moscow State University, the main university of Russia, we created a Center for Modern Marxist Studies. And this is not NGO, this is not informal network, this is official organization, official institution of Moscow State University. I think this is unique center. I don't know if you give me examples of such centers in the United States, in Europe, except China, where they have departments of Marxism. So that's why we have this contradiction. On one hand, really semi-authoritarian regime with power of oligarchs and top bureaucrats. From another side, we have a real rebirth of Marxist studies. And I use my time because it's not known in the West, and I decided to tell a few words about what we are doing. So we have journal Questions of Political Economy, 80% Marxist journal. We have journal Alternatives, a 25 years old independent left journal, and we are publishing this journal without any support from business or from state. It's based on the incomes of professors, which are not high in Russia. Yeah, it's around $1,000 for top professors and less, of course. And I brought a few copies of translated into English, selection of articles from Questions of Political Economy, what could we make. So we also published just 3 weeks ago, it was published a book, The Top of Great Revolution, the highest stage of Great Revolution, devoted to 100th anniversary of Revolution, and this is collection of texts of main Russian specialists, very well-known historians, social philosophers, and so on, plus some quotations from works of Trotsky and Bukharin, Khrushchev and Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg, and other writers. Yeah. So, and this is also interesting publication if anybody can read Russian, and some other publications, including some pre-series. This is 2 volumes Global Capital book devoted to the attempts to rethink what is market, money, capital exploitation, and so on in 21st century capital. So we are doing what we can. And we are very glad to be in touch with you, invite you for Congress devoted to 100th anniversary of October Revolution, November 2nd, 4th, and in May we definitely will have a big forum in Moscow State University devoted to 200th anniversary of Karl Marx. So let's work in dialogue together, and my great thanks for all editorial board of Science and Society, because we had chances to publish some stuff in English, and this is extremely important for us to have this done. Now to paper. So first of all, I want to discuss not the history, but the lessons of the history. This is not very, let's say, typical model talk. Postmodernist and positivist methodology typically orient us to say what we can prove by facts. To take small piece of history, to find interesting historical documents, and to say, I read this and I translate this for you. Point. Yeah. There is another variant to discuss very abstract questions, and I will do this on the next panel at 5 p.m. Was it socialist revolution or not? Was it revolution or coup d'etat, and so on. But the most interesting is to use our theoretical potential of scholars for lessons for the future. What can we as scholars say for politicians, and to say, I'm a responsible person. I do know that this is truth. This is not typical approach. Now, absolute majority of scholars prefer not to do this. not to be responsible, that you do know truth, at least a piece of truth. But if we don't know, we must go to the streets and to clean the streets. Or we must take responsibility. This is a little bit maximalism, or maybe it's a real maximalism, but I want to make some conclusions in this field. So first, about this lessons. I think if we're talking about future society, future socialism, and if we want to withdraw lessons from the October Revolution and the system of revolutions in 20th century, it was not one, not 10, more than 25 revolutions with victories and defeats during 20th century and even in the beginning of 21st century, if we take into consideration some attempts in Venezuela. And by the way, my paper is based on my lectures for Venezuela government, representatives of some ministries. I was 4 times with this lecture. So I think we can and must say socialism is not first stage of communist mode of production according to Stalinist textbooks. Attempt to build this new stage according to old style of textbooks led to the terrible contradictions and finally collapse. Also, we can and we must say this is not system of values according to textbooks of social democracy, starting from Kautsky till now, or until now. Because this also led to the collapse of social democracy. We don't have a real social democratic drive. They're sleeping. And I'm afraid that they will die and all social benefits will die with them. And this is catastrophe. But what is this? If we look on Karl Marx's writings and if we look on the experience of first years of our revolution and new economic policy and spring in Khrushchev period, we can say that this is a jump, qualitative jump from realm of necessity to realm of freedom. Or if you want, this is qualitative jump from the system where social alienation, in all forms of this alienation, is dying. And new society, which is based on disalienation of personality of society and relations, is growing. So the jump is extremely, has very big scale. It's not simply to change private property into social property. It's not only a problem to change bourgeois democracy to socialist democracy. This is a problem of qualitative jump in the history of mankind. Or as Marx wrote, jump from prehistory towards history of mankind. If we look on this, we will put some points, very important points. Point 1, not economy, but so itself, not material basis itself, but social creativity of masses is key problem for socialist revolution and future socialist society. Either we have social creativity of masses who are creating history by themselves, maybe in primitive forms, with contradictions, with mistakes, with crimes, but creating history by themselves in the direction of realm of freedom. Or we have dictatorship of conformism. And really main reason of collapse of Soviet Union is decline of enthusiasm, of social creativity, step by step. From, I will tell a few words about history. Decline of social creativity and growth of conformism of absolute majority of the people. If I can comment this in very primitive way, when Soviet people were thinking about liberation, creation of new society, building of new cities, creation of new scientific, cultural, educational centers, socialism trend was alive. When main goal of Soviet men and women was to find the beautiful, I don't know how to say this, equipment for bathroom or for kitchen or something like this, we came to the collapse of Soviet Union. So this is first lesson. Second lesson, I have only a few minutes left, is the importance of culture. And main decision of revolution, main decision of Soviet Union is not even free of charge education and healthcare. This is great, but well known. Main decision is not well known. This is a new type of culture, and as a result, new type of personality. Or if you want, vice versa. We have millions of people, maybe 20, 30, 50, nobody can calculate. Millions of people for whom real mutual respect and solidarity, creation of new relations of social life, disalienation on philosophy. Not money, not commodity, not competition, not consumerism, were main values. If we are creating, grew up such personality, we have victory, or we are moving in direction of victory. If we don't have this, we are defeated. This is the law, the consequence, the lesson of revolution. I had a lot of things to say about economy, democracy, and all traditional topics, but this is not the case. Yeah, I had 12 minutes and my time is finished. So if you want to have more stuff, there is article in Science and Society, there is another article in International Critical Thought in English. I can send you some materials. I'm supporter of property of everybody and everything.
Did you write your website?
Yes, I will write my website, and this is not very useful because its main stuff is in Russian, but I will write my email, and this is more useful because me and my friends and young friends can send you some material. And by the way, we are also proud, and this is last two sentences, we have now a new generation. We lost people who are 40, 50 years old, but we do have not too much, but 20, 30 good researchers who are 20, 25, 30 years old. And we made 3 conferences where everybody who is older than 35 did not have right to speak. It was forbidden. Only raise hand and maybe ask questions. That's it. Yeah. So, and we published 3 books of these young scholars, and so we hope that we have future. So my email, and I finish here. It's very simple. Uzgalin, mail, and website. There is some stuff in English, but it's like a place for garbage. I'm sorry, we don't have time and money.
Mr. V, Alternative.
I'm sorry, yes, you are right. Thank you, David.
Turn.
This is alternative in Russian. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, our final speaker before we open it. What? Yeah, Abhi. Yeah, go ahead. Our final speaker, also we feel very honored that he's come all the way from India, is Abhinav Sinha. He's the editor of a Marxist-Leninist Workers' Monthly, Kamgar Bugul, which translates as Workers' Bugle, and a political organizer in the working class in India with very, very broad
What part of it?
organizing. Excuse me?
What part of it?
11 states.
11 states. North India, southwestern India, western India, northwest India.
Hindi area. Hindi speaking.
Hindi, Marathi, Punjabi.
And he's a research scholar at the University of Delhi, and he's written books on the labor movement, on fascism, on Soviet socialism, on the caste question, and many other things, but particularly interesting is the way in which he is both a scholar and a Marxist intellectual that is coming to it from profound practice.
Since a lot of issue has been already covered, I'll focus on 2-3 things. One is the epochal significance of Russian Revolution. It has almost assumed a rhetorical status of a rhetorical sentence that October Revolution inaugurated a new era in human history. But it's not just a rhetorical statement. It really inaugurated a new era in the human history because it was the first state characterized by the rule of the exploited majority over the exploiting minority. All states preceding the Soviet state in the history of human society were characterized by this or that ruling class, rule of this or that ruling class, either feudal ruling class or absolutist ruling class, capitalist ruling class. And in that sense, it was the defining moment of not only the 20th century, but I think the defining moment of the entire history of human civilization. The most important question that faces Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries today, in my opinion, is explaining why the Soviet socialist experiment collapsed. Now, the dating of the collapse has been different in different circles. Some people say that it was 90s. Some people say it was the mid-80s when Glasnost and Perestroika were being cooked up, the policies of Glasnost and Perestroika. Some say that it was the 70s. Some say it was the 20th Congress, Khrushchev. In my opinion, it was the 20th Congress when Soviet socialist experiment really collapsed. Because those who explain the existence of socialism on the basis of absence or presence of private property or private capital miss the basic point that the main yardstick of characterizing any social formation from the Leninist perspective is the character of the state. And if we circumvent this basic yardstick, how are we going to characterize Soviet Union between 1917 and 1935 before collectivization? Because main sector of the economy was still dominated by private property and private capital. So those who say that private capital was not there after 56, it took a lot of time to really privatize the economy and introduction of private capital, miss the basic point in my opinion. And that has been the case with the monthly review school. There was a big debate between Paul Sweezy and Charles Bettelheim. I don't agree with Charles Bettelheim's position, but in that debate, in my opinion, Charles Bettelheim's position was more balanced. That it's not the dichotomy of market and plan which actually determines the character of social formation. It is basically the character of the state. Now, how do we determine the character of the state? As Lenin said, it is determined by the party which rules the state. And how do we characterize the character of the party? Lenin gives three bases of characterizing the character of a party. One is the composition of its leadership. Second is the composition of its policies. And third is the composition of its cadre. So on these three bases, how do we characterize the Bolshevik party before the death of Stalin? I will come to this point later. But the basic question that we face today is explaining the collapse. Why did the Soviet socialist experiment collapse? For many people, it's a settled question. For people like Slavoj Zizek, he says that it was a catastrophe. And there is no need to even review why the Soviet socialism collapsed. And it is not necessary to visualize the model of new socialist experiments for 21st century. And he proposes a thing called communism absconditus. It will be figured out automatically when these things will happen. This kind of ahistorical attitude, in my view, is detrimental to any attempt to build a new socialist alternative in the 21st century. We, as a famous Russian novelist Razul Hamdazov said, that if we, how do we say this in English? If we shoot at the past, at history, the future will bombard us with mortars. So we should not shoot at the history. We should understand, problematize what went wrong, and this is one of the main tasks before Marxist revolutionaries in the 21st century. That can hand me over the bottle. It's in the side. There are other people also for whom the analysis of collapse of Soviet socialist experiment is a settled question. Those who reduce the reason on creation of a bureaucracy, that the bureaucratic reaction replaced the working class from rule. This is travesty of basic Marxist class analysis. Bureaucracy in itself is nothing. Which class did it represent? Before 1956, for example, there was bureaucratic distortions in the state, and Stalin also pointed out to bourgeois deformities and bureaucratic distortions in the state. But if we say that bureaucracy was the main problem, we are not followers of Marxism-Leninism, but people like Simone Weil or Bruno Rizzi, who are talking about a new ruling class, bureaucracy, who define bureaucracy as a new ruling class. And it misses the basic points about class, how class is constituted in the process of production. So I won't go into the detail because time is limited. But in my opinion, the basic reason, and we can go in detail during the discussion, basic reason of the collapse of Soviet socialist experiment are twofold. One is the objective factor of the collapse, about which Professor Furr talked the objective historical limitation of Soviet socialist experiment was that they were doing it for the first time. They didn't have any precedents. And the subjective factor was coming into dominance of a theory of socialist building, which was not invention of Stalin. It was actually inherited from the traditions of the Second International, a productivist and economistic understanding of building socialism. So when the collectivization was completed in Soviet Union, Stalin said that there are no antagonistic classes in the Soviet Union anymore. This, in my opinion, led to the weakening of revolutionary vigilance of the party, of the proletarian masses, and becoming blind towards the emergence of the new bourgeoisie, as well as the attempts of the old bourgeoisie to regain its lost paradise, which was engaging in all kinds of conspiracies, intrigues, and sabotage against the Soviet state. But I mean, we cannot explain away the existence of state after 36 just on the basis of imperialist encirclement or presence of imperialist agents in the Soviet Union, as Stalin did. And that was, in my opinion, the main mistake, and that was the main reason why bodies of people's power, for example Soviets and trade unions, they became dormant, not due to some kind of intentional conspiracy on the part of Stalin or the party. It was the very notion or concept of socialist building which led to a rupture in a living link between the leading ideological political role of the party in all these platforms, including Soviets, trade unions, because now the only task was to increase production, develop productive forces, and once we reach the stage of abundance, the classic communist principle could be implemented from everyone according to his abilities and to everyone according to his needs. But confusing the revolutionary transformation of property relations with revolutionary transformation of production relations was one of the main mistakes. Property relations or relations of ownership is only one dimension of production relations. Then there is the issue of relations of distribution as well as bourgeois labor division, existence of bourgeois rights due to the disparities between mental and manual labor, disparities between town and country, disparities between industry and agriculture. And Stalin was tackling with these problems, and in one of his last writing, Economic Problems of the US, Socialism in the USSR, actually he is understanding these problems in his letter to Yaroshenko, for example. He actually mentions that it amounts to admission that antagonistic classes do exist in the Soviet Union, and there is a contradiction. That's how I read that work, and that is why I think Mao decided to make it a compulsory reading for communist cadre in China after 1949-50. So this was, in my opinion, the main reason why Soviet socialist experiment collapsed. So the objective historical dimension was the fact that they were doing it for the first time, and the subjective dimension is that except that brief interregnum of Lenin, when Lenin actually tried to fight against the economistic interpretation of building of socialism, that economistic productivistic interpretation got dominant in the party again. And I cannot go into the detail of this thing. I mean, there are phases of socialist construction in Soviet Union: the establishment of proletarian power, the civil war, the crucible of war communism, and then the introduction of new economic policies, and Lenin's conception of socialist building not as a linear process when things are developing one-sidedly, but a very dialectical process. And he gave actually an analogy of a cycle of offensive, laying siege, retreat, reorganization of forces, and new offensives. So Charles Bettelheim totally misinterprets Lenin when he actually criticizes Lenin, that Lenin called NEP a strategic retreat. For Charles Bettelheim and the pseudo-Maoists, in my opinion, NEP is the general policy of socialist construction. So Stalin should have continued with new economic policy. Ultimately, Bettelheim reaches to the conclusion in his third volume that the original sin was dissolution of the Constituent Assembly by Lenin. So that's how the trajectory of Bettelheimite interpretation develops. So, but in my opinion, this dialectical understanding of socialist building is essential. Now, I'll come to my third point, which is how do we view socialist experiment of Soviet Union today, and what are the main things that we should learn from it, on what we must not learn from it. In my opinion, there are two things that Soviet socialist experiment teaches even to the Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries of the 21st century. One is the need of a revolutionary party, not only for seizing power, but also for building socialism. Because there are various kinds of anarcho-syndicalist criticisms of socialist building in Russia, which says that party replaced the class. They charge Lenin with substitutionism. They say that trade unions, Soviets, they became docile, became dormant, became servile to the party state merged, and all these kinds of analysis which misses the basic point of class analysis. In my opinion, Lenin's theory of socialist building and the role of party in socialist building is very important to understand, and what he called the institutional leading role of the party. The leading role of the party is not only ideological, of an ideological guide, which is telling from a pulpit that Soviets should do this, trade unions should do this. It's not like that. The institutionalized role of the party is essential in building socialism. Without the institutionalized role of party in all these platforms, Soviets, trade unions, I mean, it is confusing spontaneous working class consciousness with proletarian consciousness. Proletarian consciousness is not something out there existing already automatically. Proletarian consciousness is something which is constituted by conscious political struggles under the leadership of the vanguard of the party. And this anarcho-syndicalist deviation actually, this criticism, this line of criticism starts from the workers' opposition. In fact, even earlier, the first left opposition within the Bolshevik party led by Osinsky, Smirnov and Sapronov, and then Bukharin. Then Bukharin shifted to right, joined Trotsky. But these anarcho-syndicalist analyses were rejected by him. And he argued strongly in favor of institutionalized leading role of the party. So those who don't understand it's like pitting the party against the class. People say class organization were subsided, party became the ruler. What is party if not a most advanced political organization of the proletariat, class organization of the proletariat? Now, this line of argument, it's true if party engages in institutionalized leadership, there is a risk of bureaucracy. There is a risk, but that is an objective structural factor. Unless and until the disparity between mental and manual labor is done away with, the socialist construction and the party will always run the risk of developing bureaucratic distortions. But as Marx said, there is no royal road to science. And as Mao said, revolution is not like making embroidery and going to dinner party. It's a very intense, very complex process of class struggle, which needs the institutionalized leading role of the party. The remedy which Lenin proposed to avoid these bourgeois deformities and distortion is maintaining a living link with the party, which Stalin again and again repeated in his article of early 1932, Dizzy with Success, in which he says that it is essential for the party to maintain living links with the masses, present itself for criticism from below. But Stalin's fight against bureaucratic distortions was symptomatic, in my opinion. He was seeing the symptom and instinctively he was fighting against these bourgeois deformities. But due to this productivist understanding, he was moving towards that solution, but he didn't reach because there is a physical limit of human life. He died in 1953, and but it's a counterfactual history, and social scientists do not engage in counterfactual history. But just for fun, I think Stalin would have reached the right conclusions about socialist building and the mistake of productivism had he lived longer. Finally, the second thing that is very important to understand that Bolshevik revolution teaches to Marxist-Leninist revolutionaries of the 21st century is that socialist state is after all a state. And as Engels said, the affairs of state are resolved by bayonets and rifles. And any rosy image about socialist construction will be detrimental. There will be intense class struggle, there will be attempts of the bourgeoisie is only defeated, it has not vaporized. It is there in the socialist societies constantly and penetrating into the party and the state in the garb of being communist. And to fight against these infiltrators, bourgeois deformities and bureaucratic distortions, proletariat will need state. There is a very commonplace criticism of Bolshevik revolution that Engels said that when proletarian state will come into existence, it will directly move in the direction of no state. Or what Lenin said in State and Revolution, that we only need workers with knowledge of mathematics to handle the affairs of state. But very few people know that in 1920, Lenin came in front of Comintern and revised his thesis of State and Revolution and actually said that Paris Commune model cannot be implemented immediately. And yeah, just last point, that State and Revolution thesis has often been quoted as a refutation of Lenin's policies as well as Stalin's policies of Bolshevik revolution and socialist construction in Soviet Russia, and I think it's very misinformed and ideologically misplaced if we see the entire process in its motion. Last thing, what should be the strategy of new socialist revolutions in the 21st century? What we cannot learn from Russian Revolution is the fact that we are, in my opinion, living in the valley of historical time. I mean, the descent is over, but the ascent is yet to begin. And in this situation, as Gramsci said, the old is dying, the new is not coming into existence, and it's a period of morbid symptoms. In this period, it is essential to understand that we succeeded in overthrowing a capitalist state which was very alienated from the society. It had a very narrow social base in Russia. It didn't have a wide range of social props in society. Second, the working class also was very small, 10 to 11%. The bulk of Russian population, more than 80%, was peasantry. Now, in a country like India, from where I come, landowning peasantry is only 27% cultivators. There are 320 million agrarian laborers who don't have any property, any capital at their disposal. 220 million industrial workers, totally proletarianized. Out of the 27% cultivators, more than 80% are actually what Lenin called semi-proletariat, because their principal means of livelihood is not agriculture anymore. They are basically wage laborers. So if we add these three sections of industrial proletariat, agricultural proletariat, and the rural and urban semi-proletariat, the figure is 77% of Indian population. So the forces of proletariat have also grown, and in a much faster way as compared to the bourgeois. But the bourgeois state is much more well entrenched. It had dug trenches in what Gramsci calls civil society. It's not only the matter of political society or state. Now we have to understand that if we intend to make new socialist revolutions in the 21st century, we are faced with a different enemy, much more powerful. And our power also has increased because both these classes have grown at the cost of the intermediate classes. The bourgeoisie and the proletariat have grown at the cost of the intermediate classes of petty bourgeoisie, rural petty bourgeoisie, urban petty bourgeoisie. And that is one of the central factors that we need to understand. I can go on, but I think we can discuss the rest of these issues during the discussion. Thank you.